Good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and loving life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then loving life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard. There's a lot of things that can tear you apart. I know the roads sometimes feel lonely, but remember you're not the one and only. There's always someone there to help you, a helping hand to pull you through. There's only one thing you should do: take my hand and join the Love and Laugh crew. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then they love and life guide you.
Going on. Good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and especially to the huge Loving Life family. Welcome to tonight's live stream, and it's going to be a real eye-opener, believe me. I couldn't believe what's going on behind the scenes, and tonight we're going to expose it. Now, what are we talking about? Well, we all know about this lockdown. I think it's about 60 days old in South Africa now, and it's absolutely draconian. The primary reason for countries having a lockdown is to flatten the curve of infections with the coronavirus, so that the country can prepare its response by dramatically expanding its health facilities for when the infection of coronavirus manifests itself in increasing numbers. At this time, the number of sick patients will explode. Many of these sick patients will require intensive care treatment, which is why South Africa has been building facilities like this during the lockdown. Let's have a look at an example of what I'm talking about. Here we go.
Goeienaand aan al die gamtoes mense. Is Mike Stein hier so? Ons is huidelik besig met die nuwe hospitaal, Volkswagen Hospitaal by P Plant in Port Elizabeth. Hierdie is die ingang waar jy gaan inkom. Hierdie area gaan vol beddens staan.
I apologize, it is in Afrikaans.
Hoe erg jou virus is.
That's the area that's going to be full of
Hulle
beds.
jou hier hou vir 'n ruk.
These are people who've got the
Dan skryf
coronavirus.
jy, hierdie is 'n high intensive care eenheid.
Now there's the
Die hele
ICU
gaan
area.
vol beddens wees.
Look how big that is for people who've are critically ill with coronavirus.
Waar die mense nou
And
ernstig
ventilators
is.
are absolutely critical in an
Gaan
ICU
hierso
area.
lê. Ons is besig met die inrigting. 26 dae om te kompleet. 12de Junie moet dit in werking wees. Hierdie area hier is vir al die mense wat nou gesterf het.
This is the
Gaan
mortuary
rakke
area
gestoor
for
word.
people who die as a
hulle
result of
wegvat.
coronavirus.
Hierso is van die mense besig om al die headboards en al die beddens te maak. Ongeveer 2.500 beddens vir die eerste fase.
Okay, 2,500 beds for the first phase. That's what he's talking about there. Now, okay, now you saw that intensive care unit area, huge for people who are critically ill. Okay. Now, let's remember that the lockdown in South Africa is already a complete failure and destroying the country's economy, which apparently is a price the ANC are willing to pay because small, white-owned businesses are the hardest hit, many closing down permanently, while BEE-compliant business benefits from government handouts. I say the lockdown is a failure because there is no social distancing in the townships, taxis, SASA queues, shopping malls, etc. Now I've just shown you a video of one of the new hospitals being built where anyone who tests positive will be quarantined. If you test positive now, you are put in one of those hospitals. You cannot go into self-isolation. A major part of these COVID-19 hospitals is the ICU section for critically sick patients. The most important piece of equipment in these ICU wards is the ventilator to assist with breathing. On Health Minister Zwelini Mkhizi's watch, we're going to uncover tonight how chaotic the ANC government really is. A South African-based company who manufactures these ICU ventilators blows the lid on how incompetent the government bodies handling the acquisition of these machines actually are. Right, I'm going to get Graham on now so that we can have a discussion about this whole issue. Give me a second, guys, while I get Graham on. Hi, Graham.
Hey, Scott.
How are you going?
Yeah, good, and you?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. How are things in Dubai?
Well, we're hitting the summer now, so things are getting a little warm. We've had upwards of 45 degrees the last couple of days, but we've also had some, strangely enough, very severe thunderstorms.
Wow, okay.
Which is very unseasonal.
Okay. Now, I believe that Dubai has a 4,000 bed hospital and all the beds are supported by ICU ventilators. Is that correct?
Yeah, so basically during our lockdown period, the government here used the lockdown period to, get all their institutions ready for whatever was to come. And they basically took the Dubai World Trade Center, which is a huge exhibition venue, and have literally converted it into, I think, a 4,800 bed hospital, fully equipped, fully equipped, nurses on standby, doctors on standby. They are ready to face the challenge.
And every bed has got a ICU ventilator.
From what I understand, yes.
Wow. Okay. Now things are slightly different in South Africa, but we'll get onto that in a second. First of all, let's look at Clifford Machines, which is in Pietermaritzburg. What is your position there?
Myself, together with my partner Ian Ambler, are the majority of the business. Ian is based in Pietermaritzburg. He's our people in.
Sorry, Graham, you're breaking up. Your audio's breaking up. I'm going to re-Skype you. I think we might have a bad line. Can you give me a second just to Skype you back? Graham?
Yeah.
Can you? I'm going to Skype you back. We've got a very bad line here.
I'm struggling to hear you as well.
Yeah, I'll Skype you back.
Okay.
Sorry guys, this is the internet, so this sort of stuff happens. Let's see if we can get a better line. Okay, we'll just keep at it. We know he's there. He's probably just sorting out the problem with the bandwidth. Here we go. We got him. Hi, welcome back.
Hey, Scott.
Oh, that sounds a lot better. I haven't got your camera though.
You want me to put the camera on?
Yeah, just put it on, and if it goes bad, we'll just turn the camera off again, because that'll save us bandwidth. Cool. Okay, there we go. Look, that's a much better line now. Okay, where we were at, I was just going to ask you, let's look at Clifford Machines in Pietermaritzburg. What is your position there?
Okay, so myself and my partner Ian Ambler, we're the majority shareholders in the business. Ian is our technical guru, a very seriously smart engineer. He's based in Pietermaritzburg. I look more after the commercial and marketing side, and I look after the Dubai office, and so I look after the Middle East, India, North Africa, Russia, those areas, and Europe. And then we have another office in the US which looks after North and South America.
Right, so you're basically looking at an international market, even though you're based in Pietermaritzburg.
Yeah, Scott, probably 95% of what we manufacture is exported outside of South Africa to places all over the world.
So you're a very, very important business for South Africa, because there are not many exporters left in the country. Now, I grew up in Pietermaritzburg. I went to a junior school at Wallace on Town Hill Road, and I think your brother knows that school well. But regardless of that, tell me the history of Clifford Machines, the company that you co-own there.
Okay, so Clifford Machines was formed in 1969, so obviously last year we celebrated our 50th year of existence. It was formed by a gentleman by the name of Clifford Sobey, and hence the name. Around about 2007, if I remember rightly, a German company in a similar sort of business bought the company out. And then in about 2011, they decided to disinvest, and Ian and myself were really the main players in a management buyout. And that's how we became the main shareholders of the company. But both Ian and I have now worked at Clifford, I don't know, almost 25 years. We, in fact, quite strangely started a week apart. I always call him Junior because he started a week after me.
So you're the senior partner. I like it. Now, about 20 years ago, Clifford Machines produced ventilators specially designed for local conditions in South Africa. Why did you stop?
Yeah, together with the CEO at the time, who was a gentleman by the name of Richard Sobey, who's now living in Perth in Australia, an extremely brilliant and smart engineer. He had a chance meeting with a top specialist anaesthetist who at the time was based in Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town. And together they started to develop this ventilator, and finished up developing 4 different models, from a basic model that really required no real professional knowledge. You basically just put the weight of the patient into the ventilator, and it had all the algorithms and smart stuff, and went off and did the ventilation, right up to anesthesia ventilators and ICU ventilators. The problem was that we were obviously, back then we were a very small company, and we were really a local company, and we were selling to both state institutions as well as private hospitals. With the state institutions, we always found that there was a PO, a purchase order, pushed across the top of the table, and there was a hand underneath the table. And given the recent history in South Africa with that exact issue, we are very happy to say that we decided that we didn't go that route. With the private hospitals, the story was slightly different. A lot of the doctors in the private hospitals, they'd gone to university, done their studies, learnt on the big name in ventilators at the time, which was Siemens, then gone into the private hospitals where they had Siemens equipment, and it was equipment that they were comfortable with. They really didn't want to have to learn new technologies or different technologies. So with the private hospitals, we struggled to get into there. So it was a combination of not really being able to sell to private hospitals and not really being willing to do the under the table stuff with the state hospitals that just we decided, let's just fold this project. It's not worth carrying on.
Right. Now, how critical are ICU ventilators when it comes to severe cases of the coronavirus? I've just shown a video where they have these big hospitals that they're creating in South Africa for when things get really bad, and they've got this huge room which they call the ICU room. How critical as equipment are the ICU ventilators for those beds?
Well, Scott, you understand I'm not a medical doctor, so yeah. I'm going to apologize to all of your listeners, especially those that are medical doctors, for what I'm going to explain now. It will come across in very much layman's terms, and I may not get it 100% right, but I think the basic principles will be there. So basically, the virus attacks the cell walls of your alveoli, which is where the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen happens in your lungs. So the virus gets in there, your body's immune system obviously responds to that, and you start getting inflammation. As a result of that inflammation, 2 things happen. The first thing that happens is that obviously that it does become inflamed, so it becomes more and more difficult for that interchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen through those cell walls. But there's another concept which is very unique to things like SARS and COVID-19, and it's called lung compliance. And what happens is you get, I don't know the right medical term for it, but it's almost like stiff lung. So what happens is your lungs become less and less compliant to pressure in the lungs. So ventilators become very important, first of all, to inject the additional oxygen-rich air into your lungs, to help with the compromised transfer system between your lungs and your bloodstream. But also a very important part of a ventilator is that pressure control becomes critical because the lungs are stiff. If you apply too much pressure with mechanical ventilation, you get a concept which is called barotrauma, which basically means that you literally start to break down the alveoli because of too much pressure. So it's not only are ventilators critical to the process of ensuring that you're getting oxygen-rich air into the lungs to assist with the compromised cell walls, but it's critical the way that it's put in there. And measuring of lung compliance and ensuring that you're not putting it under too much pressure into the lung is a critical part of the ventilator.
Right, so what we're saying is that the ICU ventilator is really a critical part of an ICU unit when it comes to these new hospitals set up for coronavirus.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Now, despite your company having all the blueprints and access to the experts who were involved in your ventilator production 20 years ago, you have hit your head against a brick wall in recent days trying to get your new upgraded ICU ventilator accepted by the South African government because of red tape and a lack of leadership from the top. Now, let's unpack that so people understand exactly what's going on.
Okay, so I mean, I've got to start the story at the beginning. Early in April, the Department of Trade and Industry tasked the South African radio telescope task team who'd built that Meerkat radio telescope, the square kilometer array, tasked them with putting a project in place to get ventilators into South Africa, having realized that, you know, there was going to be a critical shortage of them. This project was called the National Ventilator Project, and they got together a team of medical experts, project experts. They got together quite a good team of people who then went about putting a specification together in terms of what they wanted in the ventilator, because you must understand, a ventilator is no different to a car. You get Toyota Corollas and you get Formula One cars. And with ventilators, it's exactly the same thing. You get a wide range of different functionality with different ventilators. So they were tasked with specifying the ventilator. They were tasked with then putting it out almost in a tender, assessing the bids, and then making a decision as to who had the most successful bid, and then giving them the opportunity to go ahead and make those ventilators in numbers that were quite staggering. They wanted, I think it was 500 to 1,000 by the end of this month, and 10,000 by the end of next month, and then the month after, I can't remember the number, but it was huge.
Okay, now let's just get into some of the detail behind that. Given these timelines and urgency related to the adjudication process by the NVP, how have you found the communication between them and your company, and also that other organization which just kind of put their head up and got in the way? I'm talking about the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, or SAHPRA, because it seems that there's a huge amount of confusion and lack of communication going on there. Again, we're talking about this really tight timeline. Can you just give a background to this?
Yeah, I think the problem was that, you know, the NVP, look, I don't have any beef with the NVP. We certainly weren't chosen as one of the bidders. I don't have a beef with that. We kind of, when we put our bid in, felt that the specifications of our machines were much higher than their requirements, and they probably felt that ours was too high in order to achieve the numbers. Maybe what they didn't take into account is that we'd already built these machines. And we built these machines at a time when SAPRA, this regulatory authority, didn't actually exist. SAPRA only came into being in 2016. So we were selling ventilators, quite frankly, without certification. But we were able to dust off the blueprints. We were able to say, you know, most of the mechanical parts we kept the same. Some of the electronic parts we had to change because the technology was obsolete. But, you know, we already had the old team together. The medical team, the technical team. So we were already quite a long way down the learning curve. With the MVP, when we spoke to the MVP, they did an information session where they said that, you know, these things would have to be certified, but they would be fast-tracked. And I think this is where the first problem started. This is not just one problem, it's a litany of problems, but this is where the first problem came in. Is that I don't think the NVP had anyone from SAPRA on their committee, because I don't think anybody from the NVP really understood what the SAPRA requirements were to get certification. So when you talk about communication with the NVP, look, it wasn't great. I do respect the fact that they were probably, you know, they got something like almost 100 proposals. So they were probably busy sifting their way through these proposals. The timelines they had were very tight. I mean, we had to get our bids in by the 6th of April. They said they would do the evaluations on the 7th of April, and then the people who were successful, they would choose a couple of people, and they would have to do further presentations on Wednesday, the 8th of April. And this was in their request for proposal document. You know, by the sort of middle of April, I was writing to the NVP saying, look, we haven't heard anything, what's going on? Are we in the game or not? And then then we got a strange email from them basically saying, look, we're busy trying to sort this whole thing out. And the message was, don't call us, we'll call you. On the 22nd of April, we then got a final email from them saying, you haven't been successful. Once again, I had no huck with that. No gripe against them. They were doing a job. It's this litany of errors which we'll unpack as we go along, which I think has created the problem. But the first one was that within the NVP, their thoughts of fast-tracking this thing through SAPRA was frankly naive, because they didn't understand the requirements of SAPRA.
Right, so let's get into SAPRA. When it comes to SAPRA, you, as you said just now, you weren't aware that this organization actually existed, because previously it was quite a recent development. What hurdles did you hit when it came to SAPRA?
No, look, I can't say it didn't exist. I didn't know that it existed. You know, very early on in the NVP process, they said to us that we would have to get SAPRA certification. We were warned by the fact that they said that they would be involved in fast-tracking the process through SAPRA.
Right.
That was where the naivety came, because we went ahead, we continued developing our machine, you know, we prototyped it, we bench tested it, we got some clinicians in, we got some doctors in, you know, they gave us crits, we fixed some things, you know, we made the tweaks and everything. And when we got to the point where we believed that, right, we've now got a unit which is close to being commercially available, we then start to talk through, well, we engaged another private team called the COVID-19 Agile team. And to their credit, it's a completely private bunch of people, completely altruistic, non-governmental, headed up by the CEO of a company called Aerosud, Johan Stein. And he had got together a group of people and committed a number of resources from his own company, but also got together consultants who understood the SAPRA process, got together a really good bunch of people. And through this COVID-19 Agile team, we started to learn a little bit more about SAPRA. Now, my understanding was this Agile team was also going to be helping the NVP with their successful bidders to get this thing through SAPRA. So we got to the point where the COVID Agile team, I respect their views on this. They didn't just want to, they have limited resources. They didn't want to have all 90 people walking into the office saying, please, can you get our stuff through SAPRA? So they also had a vetting process. We did our design file, we sent it on to them. They said to us about a week to 10 days ago, they said, you know what, you guys are ready to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to assign a consultant to you, a consultant who is very familiar with the SAPRA process and who can help you through it. Always when you're dealing with these regulatory bodies, generally it's a good idea to get a consultant who knows how it all works. And unfortunately, that's where the penny started to drop for us, because once again, the consultant, he's only doing a job. But he came to us and he said, basically, in order to get this through SAPRA, you're going to have an ISO 13485 certification of your company. You're going to have to do electromagnetic compliance testing, which we understood cannot be done in South Africa. And you're going to have to do clinical trials. So the obvious question we asked is, number one, how long is this going to take? Number two, how much is it going to cost? Okay. And number three, once we've done all of this, will we get a SAPRA accreditation or certification? The answers to the questions were, 3 to 8 months, 4 to 8 months it's going to take you. The second question was, it'll be $1 million plus. And the third thing was, which really blew our hair back, was that the certification we would get from SAPRA would be essentially a limited certification, and it would be one that would only be applicable during the course of the COVID-19 crisis. Whoever, I wouldn't be sure who called the end of the crisis, but when it was called, that certification became null and void and we could no longer sell our machine in South Africa.
Okay, so let's just get down to the basics here. What the consultant said to you was that it's going to take you 4 to 8 months to actually get the machine through the SAPRA process. And then, on top of that...
No, not quite. The SAPRA people undertook to fast-track the process, okay? What that meant was, okay, when they received all of the documentation, under normal circumstances, they might take 5 or 6 weeks to go through all the documentation, really check everything properly, tick all the boxes, and then at the end it'll give you a certificate. SAPRA undertook that they would do that, they would fast track that process. What never changed was the documentation you had to bring to the door of SAPRA. Okay, and that's what would have taken us 6 to 8 months. All of these, the certificate, the ISO 13485 is not a SAPRA certification. The electromagnetic compliance testing is not a SAPRA certification. The clinical trials are not a SAPRA certification. They are the documents and the things you need to do before you make the application to SAPRA. So the problem was, before we got to the door of SAPRA, we would have spent 6 or 8 months getting all of this stuff together, by which time we would have spent $1 million plus, and by which time the crisis may very well have passed, and the certification that we were seeking was no longer going to be valid for us to actually build the units anyway. So it came down to a pure business decision that, we might as well just give up now. We actually have a working unit that has been tested internally and stuff like that. The government is crying out for these things, but because of the nature of the bureaucracy involved, it became apparent to us that we had to walk away from it.
Okay, so have all the other companies in South Africa that produce ICU ventilators faced exactly the same problem?
They have, and look, the best analogy I can use for this is that the MVP was like calling for a bunch of. They were saying, look, we have to go and play a rugby match, so we need 15 good rugby players. But unfortunately, in South Africa, nobody makes ventilators in South Africa, so they couldn't find any trained rugby players. So they went and got football players, okay. And the NVP got them together, and I think the NVT did a good job in saying, you know what, you're a little fast one, you go to the wing, you're a big fat one, you go to the prop. And they did that job.
Yeah.
Okay. The COVID-19 team then said, you know what, we're going to appoint a coach, okay, and we're going to get you going. We arrive at match day, which is the SAPRA offices, and we suddenly find out we haven't told these soccer players the rules of the rugby game. And that's been what we only found out in the last week from this consultant. And yes, I guess we are partly to blame. We have to take some blame that we didn't take this on the chin earlier on. But we were under the impression from the NVP that this process would be a fast-tracked process. It was never made to be a difficult process. It was never made to be a process where you had to get all of this other testing done outside of SAPRA before you even arrived at their doorstep. And that's where the whole thing fell down for us, was that when we finally arrived at the SAPRA doorstep, we realized the cost, the time, the effort, and the fact that we would only get a limited certification meant that we were actually, despite the fact that we've done the full development and we have a working machine, it did not make sense for us to continue with the certification.
So what we're saying is that not just your company, but other companies in South Africa that were part of this process, when they heard what SAPRA had to, or SAPRA demanded, they basically were left with no choice but to just give up, because it would have taken too long to actually reach the level of certification that would allow SAPRA to pass the product.
I can't really talk for the other companies, Scott. I've been in communication with a few of them. I think what I can say with a fair amount of certainty is we were the first ones to arrive at SAPRA's door. The other ones are now also starting to realize that this is a minefield and that effectively the door is littered with thorns. I have spoken to a few. One in particular told me, I think his quote was, "We're currently wading through the SAPRA caramel," or something like that. So I think of the 90 or 100 bids that went to NVP, you probably find that half of them fell away very quickly, not because of SAPRA, but I think that because of all of these requirements, you probably find that a lot of the guys will be falling away. As I say, I believe, I'm fairly convinced we were the first ones to the SAPRA door. We're the first ones to actually get a working prototype, but I stand to be corrected on that one. That's only my opinion.
Right. Now, just to be clear again, the idea was to have 1,000 ICU ventilators acquired by the health department by the end of this month. Is that correct? And this is through the process.
That's what the NVP RFP called for. And let me tell you what, Scott, there are some really hard-working professional companies out there, just like us, that have put in blood, sweat, and tears to get to where they are today.
Right.
I do not believe that this is a matter of choosing one company to do all of the requirements of that request for proposal. I believe that it's going to take many more than just one or two companies.
Okay, now to fill that gap, what has the government done? I believe they've actually imported a bunch of machines from overseas. Can you tell us about that?
Look, I don't think it's an import. The way I understand it, and I can only, it's hearsay for me, it's what I read in the press. I understand that the US and Israel have donated 1,000 ventilators to the South African government. Whether those ventilators have gone through the SAPRA process, I highly doubt, but once again, that's my opinion. But even if it has, then a true fast tracking has happened, and it speaks to me to, frankly, a double standard.
Yeah, I think double standard is the operative word. So what they're in effect doing is they're squashing local industry benefiting from developing and manufacturing ICU ventilators, and they are taking on board donations from other countries where those ventilators might be inferior, but they're bypassing the whole SAPRA process. Is that sort of summing up what you're saying?
Yeah, Scott. Yeah, I put a slightly different nuance on it. Look, I have to applaud the guys. You know, I can't blame them for not accepting a donation of ventilators. You know, so you have to applaud them for actually, you know, sourcing them and stuff like that. All I'm saying is that apply the same standard to me as you have to those ventilators. If those ventilators have been through the full process, then you can tell me that I'm talking rubbish, and you know, I should have no beef. You know, we're talking about saving lives here. I don't have a huck with the fact that the government has got 1,000 ventilators. I applaud them. The problem that I have is that if the process that I have to go through to put 1,000 ventilators into the market is different to the process for them receiving 1,000 ventilators from the US and Israel, that is not right.
And it appears that is the situation. I mean, you know, you can see if it's donated, clearly it hasn't gone through the rigorous process that you in South Africa are being demanded to go through. Now, you're in the process of actually applying through the US FDA, through the emergency use authorization to actually produce machines or these ICU ventilators for other countries now, aren't you?
Yeah, so, you know, it would seem, you know, it comes down to, I guess, once again, the crux of the matter is that, you know, you've got the DTI, which tells the MVP to do something. They then feel that they've done their job. The MVP then gets a bunch of bidders, and they feel they've done their job. Then SAPRA now we have to certify with SAPRA. We've got to go through that process, and they've done their job. The fact of the matter, to come back to my rugby analogy, is that there's no coach here. Okay, everybody is doing their own thing, and we've got a bunch of soccer players running around on the field, not knowing the rules and not achieving anything. And this is where the whole thing has fallen down for me, and it's the difference in the US approach. The US approach has been, we understand we're going to set up this emergency use authorization. We're going to put all the rules that are required onto the FDA website. I haven't spoken to a consultant about the FDA system. All the rules are up there. There's an email address. It says, what do you have to send to that email address? Once you send that, they have an initial assessment of your project, and if they're happy with the initial assessment, then they ask for further information. You then go to their website, Appendix B, and on the Appendix B, there are 51 ventilators listed with emergency use authorizations, and that is as of the 3rd of May. That's the last time I checked. So here's the difference. With the way the FDA have done it, they have implemented. They've made a plan and implemented. What we've done in South Africa has been very, very bits and pieces. It really has been, to me, just past the hot potato.
Right. So basically the whole process in South Africa just demonstrates a complete lack of leadership from the top going down, because they're not actually making sure that the process is working. Is that correct?
Yeah, and as I say, I don't have any beef with MVP. I don't have any beef with SAPRA. You know, the guys at SAPRA are just doing their jobs. You know, they have a set of rules to follow, and they're following those rules. I have no beef with MVP. I think they've done a great job in very difficult and trying circumstances. I was very happy to be introduced to the Agile team, whose counseling and guidance have helped us so much. The problem is there's been nobody coordinating this thing. And really what happened for us, we kind of got to the point at the beginning of last week, where we said, right, we're just going to go the FDA route. We're also going to go to the media, okay? Because it's become incumbent upon us, it's become our responsibility to make sure that somebody hears the story in the leadership space. Because it cannot be made this difficult for the people who come after us. The risk that we run, of course, is that we upset the leadership and we become pariahs. But if they listen and they are upset and we become pariahs, but they do something about it, and the people that come after us are given the opportunity to save lives, then we've done the right thing. And that was the approach that we took. To be fair, a lot of press came out last week. We were in the Sunday, there was quoted in the Sunday Times, we had an interview with Biz News, with Alec Hogg, and there was a lot that came out late last week. And you know what? The message has got through. The great thing is, for us, is that we are not being treated as pariahs. We are being taken very, very seriously. Phone calls over the weekend from the Director General of the Department of Health, a very, very intelligent man who is mortified that this is what it has come to. He has mobilized the people in SAPRA. We have a meeting with the people in SAPRA on using online resources, this Microsoft Teams, on Wednesday. And so as a result of that, we suddenly have a coach. We actually have a coach of this rugby team made up of football players. And we suddenly stand the chance of actually winning the game. So, I'm extremely grateful that the message has got through to these guys. And I'm extremely grateful at the way that they're responding. Look, we still have to have the meeting with SAPRA. We're hoping that the SAPRA approach is going to be, we kind of understand that, stuff is needed urgently. So all of this long list of requirements, we have to start saying, you know what, we can't have all of these long list of requirements. We've got to pick and choose the important ones, okay? Because we have a crisis now. And the analogy I use is that we're in the trenches right now, in World War I. It's no use sitting having a debate with the generals back at HQ about what weapon to use and whether it should be certified and stuff like that. There's bullets whizzing overhead. I grab the closest armament and I shoot back. At the same time, I do accept the requirement for oversight. It's a medical device. Okay, it can kill people. I accept that. But let's be realistic about where we need to be in terms of all of the requirements that SAPRA needs to be able to issue the certificate. And if we can get down, I said to the Director General, I said to him, listen, just give us a purchase order for 10 units, put them in your hospitals, try them out. And to his credit, he said, I'd love to do that, but you've got to understand that I have to follow the laws. Okay, and the laws require that these things are licensed through SAPRA first. I would be seriously hanging my bum out the window if I just, with a quick clean sweep, just said, right, that's what we're going to do. He did, however, undertake that if we couldn't have any joy with SAPRA, then he would get further involved. So I think he's taking the attitude that he wants to do this properly. And he's mobilized SAPRA. SAPRA have been in contact with me. We're going to have this meeting so we can reach an understanding. And if we can't reach an understanding, then I will go back to him and say, you know what, mate, we're still out of the game. But this weekend has been a heartwarming weekend for me, in that it seems that there are at least a few people who are putting their hands up and saying, I want to be Rassie Erasmus and I want to win the World Cup, and are taking responsibility. And that has been a revelation for me, because for 7 weeks that has not existed. Everybody has worked fantastically hard. MVP, Agile team, SAPRA, but without guidance, without leadership, it's like being running on a treadmill. We've all been sweating buckets and we've gone nowhere.
Right. Now, let's look at the lockdown happening in South Africa right now. The whole idea of having a lockdown is to flatten the curve so that these hospitals that they're putting in South Africa, which are like just hundreds and thousands of beds, where people are going to be quarantined if they test positive for COVID-19, go to. And a large portion of these facilities is actually a room, which is the ICU room. Now, they've got 1,000 ventilators that have been donated to them. Without these ventilators, which I think we all agree is critical equipment for treating people who are critically ill with COVID-19, you basically have a hospital that can't really do its job without the ventilators. Now, they're looking for 10,000 more ventilators at the end. Is it the end of June that they want 10,000 more ventilators? Where are they going to get
Correct.
those? Where are they going to get those?
Yeah, Scott. Yeah, I was going to say it's $1 million question, but it's probably worth a lot more than that. You know, there are people out there. You know, I've been talking daily with some really good companies, some guys who have rolled up their sleeve, come up with solutions, and who are ready to push the button. But you know what? All of them cannot start building 1,000 ventilators on the basis of nothing. You know, they need the certification and they need a commitment from somebody. You know, the government needs to place an order with them. What happens if I build 1,000 ventilators and government decides, you know, even if I've got certification, once I've got certification, I'm still not going to build the things until I get orders, whether it's from government, South African government, US government, Nigerian government. I'm not going to start building them until I've got an order, because these are expensive devices to build. So, yeah, we still have some way to travel, and unfortunately, this train has been traveling a little too slowly, because if you think about it, they wanted 1,000 by the end of this month. Well, where are we? We're 5 days away, and nobody is actually, well, we built 2. We built our first prototype, which was to test it and fix all any potential problems, and then we built a second one to test our manufacturing process. So we've built 2, but we ain't building any more until we are sure that, number one, we have certification, or the path to certification is not littered with thorns, and number 2, that we have an order.
Now, with the certification process, you mentioned that it's only valid during the emergency, the lockdown emergency. Why is that?
Yes.
Why don't they make it extended beyond that? Because that just sounds ridiculous.
Look, yeah, Scott, I get that. I can't argue with your logic, but I think where they're coming from is that if they are going to have a limited authority process and they're going to limit the requirements, then they also have to limit the length of the certification. And to be fair, that's not just a SAPRA thing. The US FDA is exactly the same. And in fact, with the US FDA, with every box that you ship, you actually have to put a package insert explaining that the product has been authorized under their emergency use authorization, and you know. So, you know, to get something normally through to get a medical device like a ventilator through the FDA is probably a 2 or 3 year process. They're doing this in weeks. So I think the logic, their logic, and I do understand it, is that, look, we're not paying as much attention as we should do to the oversight, and therefore we are limiting the validity or the length or the longevity of the certificate.
Right. Now, okay, getting back to these 10,000 units that the government needs by the end of June, that's not going to happen because of what's going on with this whole process, the red tape and so on that's going on in South Africa. So, will that effectively mean that these hospitals that they've built with these big ICU rooms, that they won't be capable to do the job they're supposed to do. Will this mean that as a result of this stuff up with the ICU ventilators in South Africa, they will have to keep the lockdown going longer to try and keep that curve flattened until they sort out this mess with the ICU ventilators?
Yeah, Scott, I mean, you have to accept I'm not a statistician and I'm not an expert
Right.
in all of these things. What I understand is the whole concept of a lockdown in all the governments where it's been done. The concept has not been to get rid of the virus. The thing that I do understand is we're not going to get rid of this thing until we have a vaccine. But the whole purpose of a lockdown has been to allow institutions to get ready so that when you come out of lockdown and people start catching the stuff again and you get a second wave, at least you've got hospitals that are equipped with all of the right equipment, with the right medicine, with nurses, with doctors, with everything. If you have a room which has got a bed in it, no nurse, no ventilator, no medicine, then it's not a hospital, it's a morgue.
Yeah, and the critical part of that, as we've said, is the ventilator. And you've actually explained why at the very start of this. Now, do you see that as a result of your going public on this, that this issue might now be resolved?
Look, certainly, as I said, my heart has been gladdened by the response since the media broke late last week, and certainly the response. I have to give a serious thumbs up to the Director General of the Department of Health. I've had some really good discussions with him, and he's fully dedicated to making sure that he acts as a coach in this matter. I'm excited. What remains to be seen is where SAPRA goes with this thing. Look, can we build 10,000 units by the end of next month? Clifford, under no circumstances, can build 10,000 units by the end of next month. But there are, as I say, there are probably 8 or 10 guys out there. I know the National Ventilator Project has whittled it down to about 6, and I understand that they were going to whittle it down to 3. But take those 6, take Clifford, get us through the process. And you know what? If we get us through the process by the end of this week, then we've got a fighting chance. But if we're still messing around in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, there is no chance that we are going to get 10,000 ventilators out of South African manufacturers. The only place you're going to look is overseas. Okay. Number one, everybody overseas is looking for exactly the same thing. So it's unlikely that you're going to find them in numbers there. And number two, if you do get them, and you do get, you know, the Draeger machines or the Siemens machines, you know, the established brands, you are going to be paying some serious money for them. You know, our machine is probably about 1/6 of the cost of a machine with the similar functionality. A lot of the machines, the guys that have been nominated by MVP, their machines are 1/10 to 1/12 of the cost. They do have limited functionality. They're not the same as ours. They're not full ICU ventilators like ours. But you know what? That doesn't mean they should be excluded. We have to get these ventilators in. And if we fiddle while Rome burns, it will burn down. That's the bottom line.
Right. And this process started, let's see, about nearly 2 months ago, in very early April. And
correct.
And you give the analogy of the football team playing rugby. You've still got a bunch of guys playing football nearly 2 months after you had your first contact with the process. And it's only now, as a result of your going to the media, that things are starting to happen.
Yeah, but I think, Scott, I have to emphasize that we've got 15 football players on the field playing their hearts out. every single one of us, the companies involved, the NVPs, the Agile team, SAPRA, everybody is really trying to do their best. But we got no coach.
Yeah.
Finally, we've got a coach. Finally, I believe we've got a coach, and this coach is getting us together. He's called a timeout. He's getting us together, and he's saying, we've got to make this thing work. And that's what excites me again. A week ago, I was out of the project. And Scott, you cannot believe the amount of time that my people have spent on this project. These guys have been working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day for 5-6 weeks. And it was bitterly disappointed. Our number one reason why we went into this thing is we understand, we went through the 2009 financial crisis where one of the big issues there, companies, when there's an economic downturn, they stop spending on three main things: training, marketing, and capital equipment. And we're a capital equipment manufacturer. By 2010, our turnover had dropped 65%, and we had to go through a huge retrenchment exercise. We went into this thing, into this whole ventilator project, knowing that we understood the technology, knowing that our market for our machines are going to be affected. We need to be doing something. This was for our people, okay? It was for the people of South Africa, and it was for the family of Clifford, our family of people. What happened at the beginning of last week? This whole thing has just blown up, and where we're at, we're now starting to look at retrenchments. And you know what? It breaks my heart to have to do it again. My head explodes, and I get seriously emotional about it. I'm sorry.
I can understand. It must be awful. It must be absolutely awful. Now, one of the steps that you've taken to basically remedy this is to look at exporting your ICU ventilators to other countries, and thus your approach to the US FDA. How is that going?
Well, so our application to the FDA only went in last week, so we're still in the initial stages there. I'm not 100% sure about how long it's going to take, but certainly by the fact that by May 3 they'd adjudicated 51 successful tenders seems to indicate that they're on the ball. That FDA certification does not give us any right whatsoever to market or distribute or sell in South Africa. There are a couple of countries which accept the FDA, but a lot don't. A lot require that you go through their own process. So basically, once we've got the FDA, we won't be able to sell to South Africa. We won't be able to sell to quite a few countries, but we will be able to market our units to those countries which accept the FDA as an authority. And that's where we will focus our efforts.
It's absolutely crazy. It's ironical that you have been put in a position where you can't supply an ICU ventilator in a time of crisis to your own country, but because the process is so much quicker in America, it's highly likely that you'll be exporting machines that could be saving lives in South Africa when they don't have the machines in South Africa. It's just absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, sure. And look, it's as far as the South African market is concerned, it's not the end of the road for us. As I say, it seems that we now have a coach on board, and hopefully with his guidance and his counselling and his involvement, we will break this impasse. It was just sad that, frankly, we had to take the initiative in terms of going to the press, potentially making us pariahs of people in high positions to actually get this action. And I just wish that it had been understood a lot earlier and leadership had happened. I mean, I'm in Dubai, but I read the newspapers, and obviously I take a great interest at what's happening back at home. I still love South Africa, and I've got my company there,
Right.
and I have a lot of people there. But some of the things that I read about, whether you're allowed to buy a T-shirt and the smoking and the drinking issues.
It's crazy.
I live, where I live in Dubai, every time they bring out a law here, it is perfectly understood and perfectly explained. We all understand, and believe me, we've had some really strict ones here. You go outside and you get stopped by the police for not wearing a mask, 10,000 rand, bam.
Right.
They don't mess around here.
Right.
But it's because of that approach that they have had such success here.
Right. Now, I'm just going
there's true leadership here, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm just going to address those watching. We've got about 500 people watching the live stream at the moment. Guys, if you have any questions for Graham, please just put them into the side chat. Now, I've got a few down here already, and I'll put those to Graham shortly. Just put your questions in there, and I'll put them to Graham. Okay, now one final thing I wanted to ask you before we get to the questions. You mentioned that you might have to retrench people within Clifford and Pietermaritzburg because of obviously during the lockdown business is pretty tough. Is your company actually operating? Is it an essential service, or is it basically just sitting there in mothballs at the moment?
We are running as an essential service. We were given that certification for the ventilator development.
Right.
But to understand our business a little bit, we sell machines for a couple of $1 million a piece. They're not small machines. They take up a large amount of space, and they require a lot of expertise and a lot of hard work to build these machines, and engineers and software guys and electronics guys and stuff like that. And even with the way things are at the moment, where I think you're only allowed like 30% of your people there, I mean, we're doing crazy things like running triple shifts and stuff like that to make sure that we actually have 100% of the people there during, or 90% of the people there during a 24-hour period, because we can't stop. And this is something that really concerns me, not just with a lot of governments, is I think they've really failed to understand the economic impact of these lockdowns. And they have got too entrenched in the concept of saving lives. Look, Scott, it's such a difficult philosophical question, and there's going to be so many viewpoints on this, but at the end of the day, it has to be a balancing act. Lives are going to be lost because of this, but lives are going to be lost because of the economic impact as well, and particularly amongst the poor. I mean, the income gap that you're going to see in the world going forward is just going to be crazy. And in some respects, there's all sorts of statistics. You don't really know who to believe. But in some respects, that it's almost like the reaction to this whole COVID-19 has been an overreaction. I hear people quoting, it's no worse than the common flu and stuff like that. But I also get that, if you've had a child die or a granny die or something, it's a hell of a lot worse than the common flu. So, we're in a world where we've never been before. And so we don't have it's like parenting. You have your first kid. Nobody gives you a manual how to bring up a kid. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And I think we're making a lot of mistakes. We are doing some good things as well. But the end analysis we will only see in a couple of, in a year or two's time. But I think the economic impact is getting to the point where it's becoming the bigger disaster than COVID-19 itself. Just my personal opinion.
I totally agree with you, and I think that the thing that I find very disturbing is that ICU ventilators are such a critical part of these big hospitals that they're building to cater for when it really goes rampant in South Africa. And the process that you've described tonight is basically just like walking through a swamp or like sludge. You're taking one step forward and taking two steps back, where you should be fast-tracked, as you said, so that you can get these damn things going into these hospitals. It's just absolutely crazy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put questions to you from the people watching, Graham. Now, just to explain to people, Graham is not a doctor, so any medical questions I'm not even going to bother putting to him. Now, this is something you probably do have an answer for, because you developed the ICU ventilators. Rupley asked, what does free flow oxygen mean with respect to COVID and delivery pressures to the lungs with respect to individual lung capacity? If that's too medical for you, just say so.
Look, one of the things that I found during this process is if you speak to an Australian doctor or a South African doctor or an American doctor, they all use slightly different terminology. I think I know a little bit of where he's coming from. And so I'm going to go a little bit medical again, and once again to your doctor listeners, I apologize if I don't get this 100% right. But when you force ventilation, okay, we all have a natural instinct to breathe, okay? When you force ventilation, i.e. the machine decides when it's going to put pressure into your lungs and when it's going to release pressure from your lungs, you get to the point where you're actually almost fighting the human instinct. Now, there's two problems with this. The first problem is, in order to do that properly, you have to sedate the patient. And with that comes a whole lot of other issues, the drugs to sedate the patient, the expertise. You can't you've got to have some serious doctors administering and prescribing these drugs, okay? The second problem is when it's forced ventilation, okay, is that your instinct almost kind of goes, and you have to learn how to breathe again when you come off the ventilator. Now, a lot of the ventilators that have been, the specifications that have been prescribed by people like MVP, and they got theirs from the British project of a similar nature. They got a lot of theirs and adjusted it for African standards, is more of what's called a CPAP device, which stands for continuous airway pressure, something like that. But it's if you're not monitoring, if you're just pumping air in and out, that's not what an ideal ventilator is. Now, take for example, our ventilator senses when somebody is about to breathe, and it says, okay, the patient is now starting to take a breath. So now we are just going to help with that breath. We're going to put a bit of positive pressure and push this oxygen-rich air into the lungs. Okay, that's one of the modes that our machine runs on. So it actually relies on the patient to continue the breathing cycle or to initiate the breathing cycle. Within our software, we also have a thing that if for 15 seconds he stops breathing, then the machine takes over, and mechanically then it does force the breathing. And this is where I think I spoke earlier about you get Toyota Corollas and you get Formula One racing cars. All of this functionality is different in these ventilators. The MVP wants a very simple one, where I'm not having a go at the simple one. It's the thing with building a simple ventilator is it is a lot simpler to build and produce in scale. Ours is a lot more difficult to build and produce in scale. But ours performs a slightly different function. So if I'm getting your listener's question right, what ours tends to do is to allow for the patient to initiate the breathing cycle and then to assist the patient in that breathing cycle, so you don't have to sedate the patient. If you require forced ventilation, Our machine can also do that, as can a lot of the other machines that have been developed. And there's many different, I spoke earlier, right at the beginning of this interview, about lung compliance. Now, as your lungs become less and less compliant, for the same amount of flow of air into your lung, as the lung becomes less compliant, you're creating more pressure in that lung, until you get to the point where, for the same flow of air, the lung actually now starts to experience barotrauma. Now, on our machine, we've got pressure alarms. You can set the pressures. So what happens is, as the lung becomes less and less compliant, okay, it will only pump in up to a certain pressure. You then create another problem where, as the lung becomes less and less compliant, because you are putting less flow to achieve the same pressure, you get to the point where you're not getting enough flow into the lung, and we have alarms for that. So it's not just a simple device. And I think a lot of people think about ventilator is just a smart pump, and it's not that. There's a lot more to a ventilator than just something that pumps air in and out of the lungs. So I'm not sure if I answered your listener's question. I hope I have.
Right. Now, David Silman has asked, so the SAPRA hotline for medical devices is a red herring? ? Well, I guess that's something we don't know.
Well, if he finds it, can you ask him to send me the number, please?
Did you get that, David? Put the SAPRA hotline number into the side chat. Now, Foxtrot has asked, what is the price of a ventilator? Let's look at a inexpensive basic ventilator, and then perhaps at your ventilator. And you mentioned the ones overseas that cost about 10 times the price. Can you give us some sort of ideas on ventilator prices?
Okay, so a basic CPAP ventilator, and what a lot of the guys out there are doing, and the guys who have been approved by NVP, I'm guessing the number is somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 US. Our machine is about $8,500. A ventilator with similar features to ours, made by a company like Draeger or Siemens, who are established people in this game, would probably be selling their ventilator for about between $50,000 and $60,000 US.
Right. So yours is a really inexpensive ventilator, which covers most of the functions of the really expensive ones. What a great deal South Africa should be. I can't believe that they've put you through all this red tape. But anyway, let's just see. We've got a couple of other questions here, but they're basically medical questions. I'll just run this one past you. Hartmut has asked, does a ventilator ever save a COVID-19 patient's life, or do they all die a few days later?
Look, I mean, there has been some medical debate about the efficacy of ventilators. But one thing is for sure, without a ventilator, if you get to the point where your lungs are seriously compromised, you don't stand a chance. I don't think that ventilators are necessarily the magic bullet. But once again, I've read a lot of conflicting views about this, and I'm not a medical person. I take the view of our medical expert, who's an internationally recognized expert, published internationally, and his attitude is very, very clear that a ventilator is a life-saving device. It doesn't work 100% of the time. You can go and get the flu jab every year. Sometimes you still get flu. So yes, there is. I accept that there is some debate, but I'm not willing to. I'm not a medical person, so I'm not really qualified. I'm here to meet a need that has been expressed at the end of the day. And if there is criticism of the fact that ventilators don't work, I accept that. But I've been asked to meet a need, and that's what I'm doing.
Right. Now, I just want to say, Graham, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. I think we've basically unwrapped what the situation is regarding the production of ventilators in South Africa and the problems that companies like yours are facing. Is there a message you would like to just give to people who listen to this video? Maybe that those who are involved in the process of deciding who actually provides the ventilators for South Africa, and just a general comment or statement you'd like to make at this time for people who are watching the video now and later.
Yeah, I think to all people in South Africa, to my team at Clifford, to the MVPs, to the SAPRAs, to all of your listeners, just keep on hustling. That's what drives me every day. Just keep on hustling. If you're not hustling, you're not making things happen. It's been an exciting challenge. It's had its ups and downs. Last week we were in a serious dip and in a depression and stuff like that. But don't let that hold you back. You just, when the horse bucks you off, if you want to carry on riding, you want to get somewhere, you got to get back on the horse. And I think that's what we did towards the end of last week, and it's proven to be successful. So, look, my message to all of your listeners, to everyone, keep safe. Follow the rules. There's lots of stupid people saying that masks don't help and stuff like that. Of course they help. It's just logical. You don't have to be a medical doctor. If we're all spitting on each other, it's going to spread faster. So just keep safe, be responsible, and hustle, and good luck. And it's been great talking to all of you.
Fantastic. Now, Ben Fraser has asked, have those 1,000 ventilators that came from overseas been tested according to South African standards? And I think you actually did talk to that point. Do you want to just reiterate what happened there?
Look, I can't comment on that. I don't know if they've been tested. I don't know if they've been certified. I can only express an opinion that if they have been certified, I don't know how they did it so quickly. I can only believe, and once again my opinion, that they have been allowed to enter the country on the basis of maybe some other certification that they have had. But that is contrary to the laws of SAPRA, which require that it has to be certified by SAPRA.
Right. Okay. Guys, look, thank you so much for watching tonight. The moderators in the side chat, thanks guys, you've done a great job again. For those people watching, please remember to subscribe to this channel. We have very interesting discussions most nights of the week at this time at 8 p.m. And finally, to our guest, Graham, thank you so much, Graham. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on and explaining to us what the situation is. I will send you the link to this live stream video in a few minutes, so if you want to circulate that to people, perhaps at Clifford machines, or put on a Facebook page or whatever, feel free to do that.
Appreciate your time, and good chatting to you, Scott, and to your listeners.
Okay, fantastic. All right, guys, I'm going to shut off the live stream now, and thank you once again for being part of the live stream. Please take care and be safe, and we'll see you again soon.